again, thank you everybody for joining this Stump Steve session. We're going to talk today mostly about display styles and display rules, and just get everybody up to speed on these a little bit. It's something that a lot of you may not be real familiar with, and maybe haven't taken much of a deep dive into, or maybe even heard of, for that matter. So I don't have a lot of slides. Most of this I'm probably going to do live, and we'll go from there. So display styles, these are something you use every day. You may not realize it, but it is something that you use every day when you're in any of our MicroStation-based products. They apply to 2D or 3D models, whether they're design models, drawing models, sheet models, really doesn't matter. They're right here. It's been here forever, I think. We've had wireframe or smooth or all these different ones, but those are display styles, and you can use those to your advantage and to do a lot of different things. So if we just take a look, I just created one really short little clip here. You know, when you open up the display style dialog, there's a lot of display styles that come with the software. And depending on which one you pick, your model may look very different from one time to the next to the next. So these will, you know, control not only, like I said, our 3D design model here, but also the other models that we do as well. Okay, so display styles, what are they? So they're a predefined collection of render overrides. They have a lot of different optional settings, and we'll try and go through most of those here. That can be applied to views, that can be applied to your different callouts that you do, whether it's a section callout or a plan view or elevation view or detail view. Each of those, or your references can have display styles, control how they look as well. They are created and managed in a big display style dialog that we're going to break down here in a moment, and they are stored in your local file. But initially, when you start out, your local file might just have wireframe or whatever was last used in that file. Otherwise, all the other ones we see there are in a DGN library somewhere, something called a DGN lib file. And anytime you activate one of those, it just gets copied locally into your file, just like levels or line styles or a lot of the other resources that we use on a day-to-day basis. So this is the display styles window. Over on the left are the names of all the display styles. You'll notice some are in bold and some aren't, and they have different icons out here in the front. And they all mean something specifically. And you'll notice there's a bunch of different sections to this display style window here. And depending on how these are set, and that's what's going to control those views. And a lot of these that come with the software are predefined based on some common usages over here to the side. So if we take a look at render mode first, we'll just kind of start at the top and work down here through each of these. So render mode has 4 different options here. There's wireframe, visible edges, build visible edges, and shaded. And we'll see each of those here in a moment and what those mean. The display one, the next one down the list there is the display mode. So this display option right here has some different toggles in it. It's dependent on the render mode. So depending on what you set this one to, again, wireframe, filled visible edges, shaded, those 4 options will determine what happens here. And actually, when this is set to wireframe, this whole display area goes away. It has no impact on what's going on because most of the stuff has to do with once something's filled in, like a 2D shape or a 3D solid or something like that. Do you want to see patterns on it or materials on it, or do you want it to be somehow transparent or things like that? Do you want it to generate shadows? So in a wireframe world, yeah, we don't want any of that, or none of that really makes sense. So if we take a look at this really quick little video here. So again, in wireframe mode, here, let me go back to it real quick. There are no display section here, but if we set this to any of the other three, then display becomes an option. But depending on what this visible edge is, or it's filled visible or shaded, determines what's going on here in this display option down here. So real quick, if I run that again, again, wireframe, we didn't have any at all. If we go to visible edges, then we get the option of something called geometry maps and transparency, but only those two. Filled visible edges, same thing. And you see the image changing in the back here. And then in the shaded mode, that's when we pick up these things called pattern maps and shadows and so forth. So let's go kind of through some of those too. So geometry maps, let me just talk about those real quick. So that we'll turn on the display of geometry maps, or AKA area patterning. You can apply area patterns, 2D cells, to your 3D surface. And if you want those to be displayed in a given view, then you would turn on geometry maps here, and those 2D cells would be applied to your 3D surface and mapped similar to a pattern or something else. Shadows. Now the shadow option that we see here is only available in the shaded render mode. All right. The other three, shadows isn't an option. And the only reason it's grayed out here is because ignore lighting is turned on. So I'll show you. If you tick off ignore lighting, then this becomes an option, and we'll see how all that works here in a second. Pattern maps, again, only available in the shaded mode here. It turns on the display of pattern maps. So like if we have materials applied to our structure, like concrete or asphalt or whatever, some kind of metal, rusted metal look or something, then those things will show up. Otherwise, it is the color of the elements themselves that will be filled in, if you have no geometry maps or pattern maps anyway. And then there's this transparency threshold here. And that's only in the visible and filled visible edge modes. Wireframe and shaded, the transparency threshold doesn't apply. But in the visible edge modes, if it's on, it determines the percentage transparency at which the element is no longer considered to be transparent in the visible edges model. Whew, what's all that mean? So let's say you had something set to a 50% transparency in your model, maybe the deck. Maybe you want to see through the deck to be able to see the beams below or something, and you only had that for the deck. In this transparency threshold, if it's set to anything smaller than 50%, then it doesn't even show you the deck at all. It's as if it's not there in the model. So it's almost, treats it as 100% transparency and just completely hides it. So anyway, so that's what our transparency threshold is. And again, we'll look at the ignore lighting tool. It's only this option's only in the shaded mode here in the display area. I like it a lot. I use illustration ignore lighting probably the most, and that's this guy here. So it kind of gives you like a hazy sunshine look. We can't have any shadows. The shadow part's grayed out here. But then we don't have to worry about a brightness option that's in a different location on the in the application. All right, next up here are these overrides here, right here in the middle section. So we have element, material, background, reflection, and thematic here. So these will, as the name implies, override how you see things in your model. For example, here under element, we can override the color, style, weight, or transparency of all the elements in the model or in the view, let's say. Any or all of those could potentially be overridden. We can do material overrides. Now the material stuff's only in the shaded mode. All right, so keep that in mind. but it will show any materials that have been assigned, or you can force a material on everything in the view, actually. So if you turn this on, you can tell it that you want a material, and then you can pick from the list of all the materials that are normally available to you to apply to all the surfaces out there. Background, if we turn on background, we can do one of a few things here. We can force a specific color on the background, or you can do kind of a background, almost photo, if you will, as well. So let me see here. Didn't mean to do that. All right. All right. Let's see. Next one up here, reflection. If reflection is turned on, it allows you to set the reflection scene in the material different from a visible background. And then thematic display is kind of a special thing. If you turn that on, then we can show things either in different colors based on their height or their slope or their aspect angle, or there's several other options as well. But those are probably the three most common we typically use on the civil side anyway. Okay, next up is edge settings. Okay, these three options down here. So visible edges, this is only available to us, actually all of these guys are only available to us in this shaded, I take that back. Visible edges is only available to us in the shaded render mode. I shouldn't make a false statement there. So these are only available in the shaded mode right here. And what those will do is they're kind of further overrides for our elements. And if you set these visible edges right here, these will take precedent over these element overrides up here. Okay, so they're both kind of doing the same thing, but if you set it down here, then it will override whatever you have up here. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then the hidden edges is optional, right? It's got a little toggle out here. We can optionally turn that on. And those work in our visible edge or filled visible edge modes, or in the shaded mode if you do the visible edge stuff. So hidden edges are available in 3 of the modes. 2 of them, you know, the 2 different hidden edge ones, or the 2 visible edge ones all the time, and then in the shaded mode, if you set something here, then you can enable this one as well. And then this treat open elements as edges. Same kind of thing with hidden edges. It's available with pretty much everything other than wireframe. If it's on, any open elements are treated as visible edges, and the edge settings are applied to them. And so that could include things like text and any elements maybe you've cut somewhere along the way as well. And then next up here, there's an option here called hidden. Essentially, you can hide any of these display styles, not from this window so much. They just kind of get grayed out in this list right here, but they don't show up in any of the drop-down lists that you might potentially apply to your model. So whether it's from the display styles or from your view attributes window, or you're using the display styles tool and applying a display style, you can hide some of these, and they just don't appear in your drop-down list anymore. They don't clutter things up. And then lastly, we have this usable for down here. And you tell us for each of these styles over here, can they be used for just regular old 2D or 3D views, or do they only apply to clip volumes, or both? So you get to decide when they show up. So let's go take a look at each of these here. So let me get out of this PowerPoint and let's go live. So get that out of the way. All right. So the display styles window, or changing of display styles. So here I'm using two different display styles and different one in each view. The one on the left here is what's considered wireframe, and over here on the right is illustration ignore lighting. Okay, so again, the display styles are right here. You have a drop down here where we can go in and change it and pick something else, and it immediately updates the view here and shows us something. And again, there's a lot of different ones that come with the software here. You can also come over here, hit the drop down and start changing things. And then after you pick a new one here, for example, if I pick wireframe, we don't see anything happen because it's waiting for me to data point a view to apply, where do I want to use wireframe at, which view here. Or if I use pick transparent, then I just left click in the view and very quickly make that active. Again, I can use this height one here, and it looks at the height of all the elements out here in the model and comes up with some values to use here for the height portion of this. So just depends on what you have displayed and what it's going to show you there. Now, to open that big display styles window we saw in the slides, we can do one of two things. I can come to this little set of ellipses here and open it from there. You can also click and hold down on the second icon here in any of these views, and down at the bottom is open the display styles dialog, and that'll get us to here. So over here on the left, you'll now notice I have several of these in bold here: illustration ignore lighting, monochrome, smooth, so on and so forth. Why are they bold? Those got copied into my file, into this file that I'm in right now, as I was just switching between modes here. So it copied them from some DGN library that's part of my workspace and copied them into my file here. And if I didn't want them for some reason, they're not really hurting anything to have them sitting there. I've never known anybody to really worry about that. But let's say I accidentally picked the thematic one here, height. I can delete it. It still shows up here. All right, it's still in a DGN library somewhere, and if I hover my cursor over, it shows me where it's at. So it's still there, but it's not being used at the moment. So it's just not in my file. It's just in the DGN library. So let's take a look at some of the different ones here. For example, my illustration ignore lighting. Again, this is probably the one I use the most here in my kind of isometric view here. It is a shaded option. Now the ignore lighting part comes into play here. Just go ahead and turn on my triangles real quick so we can see them. So there's my triangles. All right, we'll rotate this around. But in the ignore lighting, generally you get a pretty pleasing, easy on the eye kind of look here. Whereas if I just went with, let's say, vanilla illustration mode here, if I make that, if I double click that, sometimes this will be either too bright or too dark. So anything other than the one that says ignore lighting on it, I don't think there's any others that come with the software here out of the box. Most of the rest of these leave this off. So how does it decide how bright things are? Well, there's a third icon up here that also is view related, where you can turn on default lighting or not. And then, but you also have a little slider here, and you'll notice it can get really dark really fast, and you can't really see much of anything. So you might you end up using that default lighting one to get you a little closer to start with, and then kind of play with it from there. But generally for me, instead of having to play with it and get something usable, I just prefer coming down here and picking the ignore lighting, and generally it's pretty good. But again, if you want shadows, you'll notice that's not an option here. So if I go back to illustration mode, then I could turn on shadows, and now you'll notice here with each of these long columns / drilled shafts there, if I turn off shadows, of course they go away with it. Just as quickly they will come back on. So depending on what direction you're looking at the view here, might determine which way those shadows are appearing here. Okay, so those are our shadows. Again, 4 different ones here. Only one out of the box, pretty much using wireframe. Everything else is filled in somehow. And a lot of times these are just a personal preference. Some folks like illustration or lighting, like myself. Some will prefer transparent or smooth or monochrome or hidden line or whatever. No right or wrong answer. Nothing you have to use at any one time. But you'll notice each of these that I've been clicking on so far are available for, some are available for both views and clip volumes. Some, like illustration and monochrome and stuff, are view only. And some of these, like our cut and backwards and forwards and so forth, those are probably going to be clip volumes only. So that gets us through through a lot of these, right? So filled hidden lines is a filled visible edge one, whereas plain old hidden line is just visible edges only. So if I, again, there's my hidden line, and at that point, it probably doesn't look like the lighting's really going to matter much here at all. Versus a filled hidden line, we'll double click that one, make it active. Looks something like that. So how do we go about changing some of these? So these are yours to change, right? As you use these, they're getting copied to this file right here. So as far as I'm concerned, these are yours to make changes to as you go. So, if you want to, if I wanted to come in here and change illustration, ignore lighting, and tweak it somehow, I can go in and change any of these values here. So what it's doing, for example, we see all these black lines here along the edge of basically all the elements, all the faces of all the elements there. That's not coming from these overrides, only because it was done through the visible edges toggle down here. So it's set to go to a specific color. It's been forced to be a solid line style, regardless of what the default line style is on all the elements out here. And then weight 0. So that's what's given us, and you'll notice under the color part here, if I go down, it's using black out of the standard color book here. You can also give us RGB values, or you could use a color from the file's color table there. Any of those are options to use for that visible edges part. And if you wanted to turn on things like hidden edges, yeah, you could do that. This is what it's going to look like unless you go in and change it. So the style of the lines in that is determined here. There's a default style that it uses for all hidden edge stuff, but if you want to force it to a different one of the default line styles there, you can. You can also control the weight. You can say, well, make it the same as the visible edges, or it could be something else, some other weight. So again, all things you can pretty easily try out here. Not going to break anything by trying some of these things out. Now again, some of these things are applied to clip volumes, and some of them are clip volumes only. A lot of these that say cut, forward, back, and so forth are all clip volume related tools, but they could be both. So let's take a look at those. So let me go to just my generic section call out here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a sheet, and maybe I'll just do it for this here right here. Let me go ahead and turn some things off here first. Go back to element selection, turn off my triangles, and you know what, we don't really need, let's turn most of the most of that off as well. All right. So I'm going to go out here and again, just use section call out, and I'm just going to strike a line right along my support line here. Like so. I'm going to tell it that this is my bent for elevation view. We'll let it go ahead and create a drawing model, create a sheet model. These are pretty big. Let's try a different scale here. And let it create that. So off it goes. Now, when somebody created this particular sheet model and drawing model especially, there was some default display styles set up to be used there. So how do we find out what those are? Because what it looks like here, this is what it's going to look like on the sheet. Okay, so when you have both drawing models and sheet models going, you control a lot of it from right here. The sheet is just a reference of this right here. So how do we change the display styles and what we see or don't see here? You'll notice if I zoom in, some of this is purple, some of this is black. We've got different things going on here. What's determining all that? So if I hold my right mouse button down, so I'm in plain old element selection, hold down my right mouse button, I get my context sensitive menu here. One of the things we can choose is set reference presentation right here. And what that brings up is we've got all this stuff up here I'm not really worried about, but then down here below, there's something called clip volume settings. And there's a forward one and a back one and a cut and an outside. And I've gone over this in other presentations and videos, but cut is everything, when I place those lines out there in that top view along the support line at each endpoint, and what it did is it sliced straight down from there, and that is along my cut line right here. And then anything else we see here is based on this thing called our forward view. So these are display, snap, and locate options, right? Just like a reference file. And any of these can be turned on or off. So for example, if I say, I don't want to see anything in the forward view, I only want to see where that cut line was. That's it. That's all I want to see. So I turn that off, and then I come down here and say, go ahead and accept the changes. And if we zoom in, you'll notice all those little thin black lines we saw a moment ago, they just disappeared. Because that was in the forward view. So let's go back to this reference presentation again, and we'll turn that back on. But note the names here. So I have one, so cut is cut, and this one's something else. Well, let's just mess with cut for right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. We'll turn the forward view back on. But let's go look at that cut one. So if I click this icon right here, I go ahead and bring up the display styles window. Here's our cut tool here. So it's using visible edges. All right. And it's got geometry maps, but we don't have any patterns applied to anything here. We don't have anything transparent. So whether these are on or off, they're having no impact on us right now whatsoever. There are these element overrides that's telling it to do things in red. But then down here, we have some visible edge stuff that's saying, no, make it this purple color. And what are we seeing out here? Well, it's all purple. Remember, when I said, if you do something here in the visible edge area, this will take precedence over any of these overrides up here. All right, so if you have both set, really no reason for that. This one will override, or it will override the override, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. So it takes precedence here. So you could come in here and maybe make this white and weight 2. Now it doesn't show up here immediately, but if I just zoom in or out or update the view or whatever, then it affects it immediately. So there's my, everything I'm seeing here in white is a solid weight 2 line that was at my cut line as I went down. And then this forward one back here, there's something else. Now if I wanted, we could turn on hidden edges. We don't really have anything hidden here going on at the moment, so there's really not much to be done there. But if you did turn on hidden edges, again, you could force a line style on it and or a weight on those hidden edges at the cut line. So if you had reinforcement in here, then you would need to turn on hidden edges, because it would be, or you might want to turn on those hidden edges so you could see your reinforcement inside of the cap here or inside of the column, let's say. All right, back to our reference presentation. Take a look at concrete forward, hidden rebar. All right. So concrete forward, hidden rebar, this guy right here. So if we select that one, oops, let's just leave it there. So it has no element overrides, but it does have some visible edge overrides, and it's set to true color of 000, so it's solid black. No line styles or weights being applied here, but there are hidden edges turned on, and those, again, have a symbology there. Now we're not really seeing any, well, we are seeing a little bit of hidden edges here. Not much, but just a little bit there. But if we let's say, went in and real quick created a different section call out here. Maybe I went in and used that same tool and I just strike a horizontal line and I drag down. So it's as if I'm standing on top, up above the cap, let's say, looking down directly on the cap here. This will be my event for plan of cap view. And I'll let it go ahead and create a drawing model and a sheet model of this guy. And this one I'll go ahead and put on the same sheet as our elevation view there and let it go ahead and open the model. So off it goes, creates our plan view here. And you'll notice if we zoom in, what do we see in that plan view? Well, we're seeing some dashed lines here. We're seeing dashed lines here. We're seeing them, sorry about the flickering, where each of our columns are. Some of these bearings are kind of overlapping with the cap here. So that's where a lot of that's coming in. But again, I can right click on this and go to set reference presentation, but I can't really affect it. I don't have those clip volume settings here. They're just being inherited here. So I really just need to go back to the drawing model for that. Now, the easy way to get there, if I just hover over this little drawing boundary text here, I can go straight to this icon right here and say, go ahead and open the drawing model of this cap. So there's my cap plan view. Again, reference presentation, I can go see how that is set up. I can see cut, and I can see how these are set. This didn't cut through anything, right? We were up above the cap looking down, so nothing cut. I could turn off here, hit the update button. We don't see anything change because we didn't cut anything. Everything here is in the forward view. So that's what's going to control how all of this looks. And again, it's all based on this one item right here. If I turned off hidden lines, then all this dash stuff would go away for us. So anyway, so those are display styles getting applied to these clip volumes. Now, sometimes you need to get even a little fancier than that, let's say. But again, a lot of this stuff, again, we can get to from the right-click menu. Now, the reference presentation stuff, you can get to from down here as well. You can pick a file. Oops, I accidentally double-clicked. I can right-click on it and open the presentation option here, or you can double-click under the presentation column and open that as well. So a lot of different ways to get to this window here. But again, you get to decide what is displayed. Is it stuff at the cut line, only in the forward view, only at the cut line, maybe in the back view, so on and so forth. And then what display style to use to display those. Now, anytime you make changes to any of this, you'll want to use this icon right here to accept those changes that you've made here, whether things are displayed or not, and what display style was used, and force it to update the save view for you, and use that going forward for your presentation style. Okay, let me click off of that. Okay, one other thing, and maybe we'll just go all the way back to our default model for this part of it here. So right now, again, up here, we're using what? Illustration, ignore lighting. Now let's say we wanted to do something here and we wanted to maybe highlight the superstructure in this model, or turn it off, or make it transparent and nothing else transparent, or things like that. So because everything here, so let me go down to illustration and line. So this is applying to all the elements in the view equally. They don't get to decide, apply it to some and not others or whatever. It's being applied to everything here. So, but we do have something called display rules. And these just kind of take things to another kind of level, if you will. The roadway folks, I noticed a few years ago, did some neat ones where in their 2D or 3D models, they could go in and highlight the asphalt pavement and not show anything else, or they could highlight concrete pavement and then make everything else so it would show up in this color, and everything that wasn't on the concrete pavement level would end up being this light gray color and have some transparency applied to it as well. So just kind of gray scales it all out, or screens it out. I've seen agencies do some neat things with these as well, where if a reference logical has a certain word in it, they will screen it out. So let's say you've got existing topo and you want it to be just a light gray color and kind of very thin or screened out. Really great way of doing it is with these display rules here, because again, they can be applied to the whole view, but they can also be applied to references and section cuts or anything else. So so for display rules, real quick, I do have one quick little slide here, not that we need it, but it's just like some criteria that's processed on any view of a design. And these let you control things like symbology and appearance. You can hide things or turn them on. You can, like I said, you can screen them out. We can do a lot of different things with this, and these can be relatively simple. They can be pretty darn sophisticated. So how do we create one of these real quick? So let me go ahead and create one. So I want to create a new display rule here, and maybe I'll let's just highlight superstructure here. So we'll go ahead and set it to that. And then now we need to create some conditions over here on the right that tell it how to do this. So I'm going to tell it I want to create a new condition. And instead of applying it to anything and everything, we can do it based on some property. Now, when you go to do this the first time in a file, it takes a little moment here to load up all the different options of properties that are available to you. But once it loads it up, then we can see we got element-based properties, so the individual elements in your model, view-specific properties, model, reference, and file. And all these have different options on them. So that, this reference one, again, was the one that was used, like I said, by a particular agency that it scanned, and I don't remember if it was a logical name or the description for a keyword. And if it contained a keyword, then it did something to that particular reference. Now, in our case, again, we're going to try and highlight the superstructure here. So let me just drill down into this. So one of the things would be our deck. So I'm going to turn on or search for the word deck down here, because there's thousands of properties down there, potentially anyway. So I'm going to look for one, deck properties. Let me see. Not that one, not that one. Deck properties presentation. I'm going to say yes, it is. Element is a deck property presentation. And then once I have it set, so I'm telling it what to look for, then what do I want it to do? What is the action it should take? Do I want it to hide the element entirely? Let's just try that real quick. So let me set this to hide element. And here in the display rules, so this is illustration ignore lighting, and we called this, we said highlight superstructure, right? But right now it's not highlighting it, it hid it, okay? But I could come in here and change this and say, well, you know what, I don't want to hide it. Let's just do some kind of symbology override here. Maybe I'll come in here and I will pick it and say, make it a different color. Ooh, I don't like that. Let's try that color. All right, that's a little easier on the eyes. But again, you could do color. You could override some fill colors, some styles, weights, even transparency here. So you could also make it some level of transparency. Maybe we make it really pretty darn transparent there. So it's that purple color, and oh, by the way, it's transparent. And then if we want to add additional conditions here to this and apply this equally to, let's say, the barriers or the beams or something else there, let's just go do the barriers. I can click on this and I can add other criteria. If I want to do the same action to something, I just tell it to go look for something else as well. And you can and or these things. I'm going to say or, so if it's a deck, or let's go look for barriers. So I'm going to pick barrier, and we'll just use the barrier presentation right here at the top and pick OK to that. And now you'll notice my barrier is now purple and transparent as well. Okay. And then we could, continue on down. Go ahead and do the girders or whatever else we want. So let's say beam, and let's see. There's one here called beam segment. So either decks or barriers or beams. Click, and there we are. So again, that's how you can go, and you can have multiple ones in here. I could tell it for everything else in the model here, gray it out. If it's not one of those three, do something else. So my caps and my drilled shafts and my columns and so forth, I could hide them or change the color of them or do whatever I want. So really a lot of different options available to you here. And even these display rules work in the regular views here, but they could also be used just as easily to help you make things look a certain way in your drawing models and sheet models as well. Okay. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Feel free to throw those in the chat window. I haven't really seen where anybody's had any questions yet. Otherwise, that's really all I have today. I want to thank everybody for joining me today and having such a great turnout, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.